First, I would like to thank my pastor for this wonderful opportunity. And for those of you who do not know, this is my first time. So, so I hope with the word that I do have for you this evening that you're able to take something away from it. So the first utterance of the cross from Jesus comes from Luke 23:34, and it says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Today, I would like to come from the subject, how to act in the midst of persecution. How to act in the midst of persecution. And if you are taking notes, because I did see a note sheet, please underline the word act. Act. A-C-T. Act. According to the Gospel of Luke, prior to this moment of this first utterance, Judas betrayed Jesus and Jesus was arrested. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. In custody, Jesus was mocked, falsely accused, and he was beaten. While in custody, Jesus was accused of misleading people. He stood before Pilate, he stood before Herod, and he had to go back before Pilate because there was a struggle to find him guilty. The crowd was demanding that Jesus should be crucified, and Pilate allowed his judgment to be swayed based off the cries from the crowd. So Pilate ultimately granted the request of the crowd. And Jesus was then on his journey to be crucified on the cross. When he gets to his destination, there were 2 more criminals who were also going to be crucified with him. And his first utterance was, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The primary business of the cross was forgiveness, but Jesus represented our human obligation with forgiveness. Jesus demonstrated and modeled what we need to do in the midst of persecution, which is to act. So I'm going to do an acronym for you. So we're going to start with the letter A. A is for acknowledge God. The word Father proved that the faith of Jesus was unshaken. In spite of what he had to go through and experience, he turned it over to God. So what do you do in the midst of persecution? You act. In terms of A, acknowledging God. C, choose compassion. Once Jesus acknowledged God, he said, "Forgive them." He demonstrated an expression of the limitless compassion of divine grace. Jesus was demonstrating our obligation of how we should act or react toward each other. He could have had a grudge, but he did not. He chose compassion. So after you acknowledge God, you need to choose compassion. T, transform the narrative. Once compassion was extended, the narrative was able to get transformed when he said, "For they know not what they do." Those who were going to crucify Jesus were not aware of the full scope of what they were doing because they did not recognize him as the Messiah. Their ignorance of the truth could mean that they did not deserve forgiveness. However, Jesus' prayer in the midst of persecution is an expression of transforming the narrative. Instead of pointing the finger, he decided to look at it from another perspective. Persecution can come in many different forms in your life, but when it comes, we are to act accordingly. This utterance shows that Jesus was a forgiving Messiah even as he was being persecuted. I'm going to say that again. This utterance shows that Jesus was a forgiving Messiah even as he was being persecuted. He demonstrated truly on how we should act in the midst of persecution. A, acknowledge God. Keep God in the forefront. Reach out to him when you need him to intervene. C, choose compassion. Be intentional with your reaction to people and uphold your obligation to other people, regardless of what they do to you. Still choose compassion. T, transform the narrative. There's always a greater picture and a greater perspective, and sometimes it's bigger and greater than you, but it's up to you to be willing to accept it. So I leave you with this question. So how would you act when you are in the midst of persecution from this day forward? How will you act? God bless you.